Cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining today, and thanks again to Stripe for hosting. It's a huge pleasure and honor to have Satya Nadella with us here today. He is, I think, the GOAT of technology CEOs. So it's having LeBron here with me or something similar is sort of what it feels like. And I think just for a little bit of history, you joined Microsoft, I believe, in 1992, and ran a variety of different divisions, took over as CEO in 2014. And when you joined Microsoft, it was perceived as sort of the behemoth of tech. And then it went through a period in the 2000s where it was viewed as a company that was still very strong in enterprise and other areas, but wasn't necessarily going to set the stage for the future. And then I feel like under your tenure, it's transformed into one of the most exciting and interesting companies in all of technology. And that's through big moves around LinkedIn, OpenAI, gaming, just a variety of different areas. It'd be great to just hear first, what was Microsoft like when you took over, and how did you think about the culture, the directions, the strategy, and how you were going to impact that over time?
First of all, it's great to be with you, Elad. And, it is true. It's I've now spent over 3 decades in one company, and it's pretty much all my professional career. And I have better language to describe it now, but I think companies, here there are lots of folks who are founders of companies, and I think companies also go through these refounding moments. I picked this up from Reid Hoffman, which I think is a fantastic frame. It's not talked about as much, and although in 2014 when I became CEO, having grown up in the company as a consummate insider, I felt that we needed to essentially refound the company, ground ourselves back in what's the core sense of purpose and mission, so that then we can pursue something new and bold, keeping that mission in mind. And in fact, when I joined in '92, we used to talk about a PC in every home and every desk as our mission. In retrospect, it is easy. You could put it on a spreadsheet and calculate it and what have you, except that by the late 90s, we have more or less achieved that, at least in the developed world. And I felt, ever since then, we were a little like, okay, what's our mission? Is it mission accomplished? Is it time to return all the money to the shareholders? And so that's why I went back all the way, quite frankly, to the very genesis of the company. After all, we were a tools company first. Bill built the basic interpreter for the Altair, and I said, God, there's more need for tools and platforms in 2014, 2023. I'm coming from OpenAI's Dev Day. That's who we are, right? At the core, we build tech so that others can build more tech. And so I said, let's ground ourselves in that mission, and that has been very, very helpful. The other one, though, is culture is the other piece you brought up. Look, I distinctly remember at Microsoft in the late 90s walking around campus, and there was just all the folks sort of saying, God, we must be God's gifts to mankind because we are so good, now that, the market also recognizes it, except that it was obviously the beginning of the end in some sense, right? The day hubris takes over and you're not grounded in what made you, first of all, successful, that customer feedback loop, that hunger to learn, to experiment, to do things, which obviously, startups do. And so I loved, I picked up this cultural frame from Carol Dweck at Stanford around growth mindset. And I said, God, we don't want to be these know-it-alls, but we want to be learn-it-alls. And that has been God-sent, right? Because one, it was not considered new dogma from a new CEO. It was something that I think spoke to people. As humans, it helps us be better parents, better partners, better colleagues, neighbors, leaders. And so between these two things, that renewed sense of purpose, I tell you, especially, you shouldn't, founders, I think, have this innate capability because they've created something from nothing. And then there's the cult of personality that carries forward. But when, at some point, if your company is going to outlast you, that mission has to be a lot more than cult of personality. And so that's why I think CEOs in particular, or mere mortal CEOs like me, being much more focused on what is the mission, what is the culture, is the one thing that I would say are two critical things. And of course, that gives you the permission to then make the right calls, but you have to make right calls on strategy picking, execution, because, but at least it gives you better shots on goal.
How do you think about the ability to pursue strategy in today's climate? So I know M&A is a little bit more challenging for a variety of reasons. There's a big wave of AI and other technologies sort of happening. What advice would you give to founders in the audience or people who are running successful businesses in terms of how to think about their directionality, but also how to think about tools like M&A or organic growth?
I mean, I think, look, at the end of the day, we talk a lot about M&A, but I think all of us fundamentally bet on organic growth, right? Whether you're a startup or you are a large company. If I look at even at Microsoft, I think a lot of what gets written about is our inorganic. But when I think about most of the big hits and the most of the big revenue generators are, quite frankly, partnerships and organic. Partnerships is another thing that people don't talk about. The OpenAI thing it's a great partnership. I grew up. In fact, the Gates Grove model is something that I love, right? Which is Intel and Microsoft created the PC ecosystem. It was one of the wonderful partnerships. It's also important, right? In partnerships, it's important to sort of, what happens is if one of the partners becomes too greedy, then it's unstable. But if you can cultivate great partnerships, that's another fantastic source of growth for companies. And so, yes, in organic partnerships and then strategic M&A, all three matter. For a company today, yes, I think we're going through a little bit of what I would say is, regulatory adjustment around the world is the best, way I can describe it, to understand whether we should allow M&As. Big companies, just because they're big, shouldn't be acquiring, which I think will have a chilling effect. And it's not exactly good for, quite frankly, more startup creation and more vibrancy. But let's say that settles. But I think, yes, I would always look at all three of them. Organic, first focus on having a great organic plan, because that's the one thing you can always control. Partnerships is something that I would say, don't think of it as a press release, but I think it can absolutely be and long-term stable partnerships, right? Where you win. There's the three wins, right? The customer wins, the partner wins, and you win. In fact, the best partnerships are when you start caring about the partner, really making sure that they're getting economic surplus. Because if it's all about, sometimes in our Silicon Valley culture, we have a little bit of excessive zero-sum stuff. There are very few zero-sum battles, actually, when you think about it. But we are very obsessed about everything as being zero-sum. And that's where I think a little bit of subtlety, nuance would help.
So one of the big waves that's happening right now that Microsoft has really been central and seminal to is this change in AI. And that's transformer-based models, diffusion-based models have really changed the trajectory of what we can do with these sorts of machine systems. You've lived through some of the biggest technology waves of the last 30 years in a really central position, and that's everything from the internet to cloud, the PC revolution, which you mentioned, mobile. How big of a deal is AI in your mind relative to all these other trends?
I think it's sort of, it's as big as any one of the things that you mentioned. The way I try to come back to what exactly changed, and how should we relate to it in terms of any business building, product building. I think there are two big changes, right? One is, I think we're going to think about application interface drastically differently, right? We have we've been talking about natural user interfaces forever. You could say for 70 years of computing history, from Engelbart down, has always been about hey, how do we have the ultimate human-computer symbiosis? And I think we now have some new tools to rethink that, right? Chat, it starts with chat, starts with text, but it goes quickly beyond that. It's multimodal, and it's going to be very interesting for us to sort of apply. So that's why, in some sense, it reminds me a little bit, at least in our history, of what happened. And I was mentioning this to you backstage when I joined Microsoft in '92, we had just released Word or Excel or PowerPoint or Publisher. Each day there was a new app, and because Windows 3 was just happening, it feels like that, which is how I can rethink even existing categories with new interface. But we also know that new platforms are not about just taking the old and just building a new UI, but there is also, what is it this UI can create as a business that didn't exist? In fact, that's the thing that I'm most interested in. Obviously mobile had a lot of things we did on the desktop, but it also created companies like Airbnb and Uber. And I think that that's something that we should think about on the UI side. Like, what's the UI AI-first app that I've sort of started using? I don't think we've yet cracked it, but I think we're getting close. The second thing that I also think is more, in fact, the other technology that people don't talk as much, I don't know why, and when we talk about our big paradigms, is relational databases. God, what a thing it was. It is like the other secular journey in digital technology was digitizing people, places, and things, right? That's another 70 years. All we do is each day we wake up and there's more places, people, and things that are digitized, and relational algebra and relational databases helped us reason over it in interesting ways. I feel like we now have a new pattern recognizer or new reasoning engine in this, doing neural algebra on it. So I feel these two things, Elad, if you take an existing category, I have a new way to think about the user interface, I have a new way to reason about all the data I have and the knowledge in the world and do the join, so to speak. If you start thinking of applications that way, and then building a new-to-the-world business, then I think this would be as big as, at least any one of the things that you mentioned.
A lot of the trends that people are talking about right now that at least strike me as a little bit early, but maybe very interesting in the future, that capture both of the things that you mentioned, is moving to an agent world or an agent-driven world where people talk about how eventually we'll have agents that will represent us, will represent apps we interact with, companies, governments, et cetera. How much of a believer are you in this sort of future world of agent-driven action or agent-driven interfaces? And what do you think the timeline is to that if it does exist?
I'm a big believer in that. And so, in fact, at least in our world, the design pattern I love a lot, which we picked for our own product building, which we evangelize as a pattern for anybody, is this co-pilot. First of all, there's a human in the loop. The human has agency, judgment of the human matters. And so the first instances were things like GitHub Copilot, where the Copilot is built into the app canvas, so to speak. There's a sidecar, and those things all work together to help you with your task at hand, which is to get your coding done or what have you. And then we've now propagated that into knowledge work with the Microsoft 365 Copilot across all of our surfaces. But ultimately, when I think about what we did with Bing Chat, I think of Bing Chat as basically the web copilot. This M365 is the work copilot. So the web copilot and the work copilot could be sort of the universal agent, so to speak. That's kind of how at least I conceive of it. But it needs one important capability, which is it needs to be able to talk to other agents, a customer service agent, a travel agent, to get work done. Some of it'll be interrupt driven in the sense that it'll be autonomous, but it'll also bring back to you for decision making. So I think that one of the key runtimes of our time will be that multi-agent runtime. And there's we have a thing in open source called AutoGen that is getting some good traction. So we're building some of the stuff similar to that underneath what is our Copilot. Obviously, today, OpenAI launched a bunch of very interesting stuff with GPTs, which is sort of, I would say, early agents on top of ChatGPT itself. They even have an agent API. All that we will put into even our Copilot ecosystem. So I think, yes. So to your fundamental point, I think this idea that people will have agents, these agents will interoperate with each other. There will be some type of super apps that will be, whoever cracks, there will be a few runtimes where naturally people will gravitate to, which will be these multi-agent frameworks.
You mentioned as well that you're very excited about the business potential of a lot of these things and what's going to transform, and obviously Microsoft has done some very innovative things through GitHub Copilot, through some of the other areas that you mentioned. Are there any areas of the business world that Microsoft is not directly involved with that you think are most likely to transform via AI in the near term?
That's an interesting way to ask. If I knew about it, I probably would be in it. But maybe a little bit to pull on it, right? Which is, look, one of the things I am grounded on is I think time has come for us as a tech industry to directly parlay what we celebrate as tech advances into broad economic growth. Because I think, there's this real critique, which some of it is, I think, well-founded about, hey, you guys talk a lot about sort of all this tech, but where is the economic growth? I mean, last time we checked in the developed world, inflation adjusted, we are probably at, zero or negative growth. And so there is real need for economic growth, and economic growth that comes while keeping the planet healthy and more equitable and in terms of the growth itself. So there are many other things as well, which I think are core responsibilities. But that said, we have to drive economic growth. And that's where I got excited with GitHub Copilot, right? When we can take something like software development, bring joy back to software development. Man, what we had done to, the fact that I've just got to copy paste from a variety of places, get distracted. Instead of that, let's just stay in flow, focus, and then see how you can bring back productivity to software developers. But the interesting thing about the more we study GitHub Copilot's effect in an organization is if you get software development to be faster, all the other functions around you change. The workflow, in fact, when a salesperson does a pull request, that's kind of my thing about wow, that's a different org. And so now you can imagine an entire organization that's moving at a different pace. So I think we are at the frontier of figuring out what does it mean for both having these productivity boosters inside of every function, and then what is the workflow if you have it? Like you talked about agents. I think we will have to discover, if you remember in the mid-90s, when we first started putting things like systems of record, like CRM and ERP and what have you, we used to talk about something called business process reengineering. It was as much about a new methodology or a doctrine even, of how you run businesses. Like, you didn't have 5 finance departments, or you didn't have manufacturing COGS, not in financial accounting. So some of the business practices will have to change. So that's why I think what is probably interesting would be how people think about a vertical industry or a business process probably is going to be very, very different. And one of the things I think most people thought is that, can there be a large business created that only focuses on one vertical or one business process? I think there can be. It all depends on how much economic surplus you can create using this technology.
You mentioned partnerships earlier and how they're a key linchpin to Microsoft's ongoing strategy and how it's worked with different partners over time. One thing that I think has been very exciting is how you've both worked with OpenAI very deeply for their closed source models, as well as Meta around Llama in the open source world. How do you think about how Microsoft engages with open source and closed source and AI evolves over time, and those relationships with those partners in particular?
Yeah, for us, it's not a either or. If the GitHub exists primarily because of the permission to support the open source ecosystem. So it's sort of not something that we take lightly, and so therefore we will always be, as a company. In fact, it turns out, I think most people don't recognize we're the biggest contributors to open source. We are probably today the biggest contributor to Linux as Microsoft, and so so it's sort of now fundamentally ingrained. But that doesn't mean we don't have a bunch of proprietary closed source systems and revenue streams as well. So therefore, to us, it's pretty much part of business. Then the question is, what's the best way to be able to meet the developers, meet the companies, meet the organizational needs that we serve well? And so that's why even when it comes to foundational models, we have obviously OpenAI is our lead partner when it comes to frontier models, but we have a lot of open source models, including ours. We're very excited about even our own contributions, like I love these SLMs, these small language models with Psi, and so we're going to always contribute, we'll support, and make sure the developers have choice. And in our own products, you'll see a mix of use as well.
I guess one of the emerging critiques around both open source models as well as advanced LLMs is concerns around safety. And I think people often mix 3 types of safety. There's safety that I'd almost view as like textual safety. It's misinformation, it's bias, it's hate speech, et cetera. There's physical safety. It's, will the AI be used to derail a train or develop a virus or things like that? And then there's existential safety. Do you worry about some point having some sort of confrontation with an AI species or an intelligence that's gathering resources or whatever it may be? How do you think about those critiques, and how do you think about AI safety over time?
Yeah, I mean, I love in fact, I remember talking to you, I guess, a few months ago, and you had laid out this taxonomy, which I like. I think one of the things that we don't have is that a well-grounded way to talk about these perhaps three levels, because when we say safety, it could mean, wow, we're talking about an existential issue or, election interference, deep fakes or what have you. So I think let's unpack them that way. So my feeling is that the first thing we've got to really go and focus on is any real world harm today, right? Because of any AI deployment that sort of is not gone right. And in fact, in democracies in particular, the thing that I worry the most about is, quite frankly, elections and our democratic process somehow being unduly influenced by some use of AI. I think that that's the place where, rightfully so, we'll be held to account if something goes wrong there. Because after all, that was the critique of what happened in social media. Everybody was excited about social media because of Arab Spring, but it kind of nearly broke democracy. And so therefore, now everybody says, look, we're not going to let that happen again. And so the question is, what do we do there? What does the government do? What does the civic society do? What do companies do? And that's and quite frankly, I think we somehow say that this is at the end of the day, it's a societal choice. It's not any one company can do everything here. It's sort of a societal choice. Like for example, in the United States, after all, you have to be able to come together and say, how do we think about free speech and what turns out to be free speech that is now bordering on election interference or what have you, or disinformation. These are tough things. And so therefore, this is not like a decision an AI can make or a decision a company's moderators can make, but they're societal norms and decisions. And so that's the most complicated process we have to engage in. Quite frankly, the other ones, the existential risks, one, there's time. Second, I think there are more engineering solutions to that. In an interesting way, the fundamental thing is, well, if you have a self-improving program that we've lost control over, the last time I checked, there are people in other sort of engineering fields who know control theory and how to think about it. So there must be stuff we can learn from others and apply it. But I'm glad that the dialogue is happening on the existential risk in the same time. The other one in the middle, which you talked about, which I like, which is, before we deploy AI into the real world, like for example, if it's going to actuate stuff in the world, that might be a thing where you may want to think about more carefully. And that's where risk-based regulation is also a helpful thing. It's like cars do get deployed, but they have regulation that's different than a lot of other regulation. And so we have, in healthcare, in financial services, in auto safety, already existing regulations, and we can subject AI to the same regulation. So I think having maybe for the middle, more risk-based approach, more research funding, quite frankly, for the existential stuff, and then for the real-world harms today, whether it's bias or election interference, both what are the societal norms? That's as much about us as a democratic society, and especially in the United States, I hope we take that responsibility. And I really hope there will be an election in which a politician wins the election, where they're able to articulate a vision, right? This is where it bugs me when tech leaders are the ones who are talking about this, right? I didn't elect a tech leader to speak for me as an elected official. So I would rather have sort of the representatives of the people sort of win elections by having a real vision for what the norms are for how we engage.
Makes a lot of sense. I guess related to that, there's a lot of promise for AI in terms of global equity. And so when I look at the really big thrusts in terms of where it can impact things, one is in healthcare, and you see things like the MedPalm 2 model from Google, which has enormous performance on the healthcare side and the ability to have good output relative to health-related criteria, and then education. And Microsoft owns Minecraft, which is one of the most popular tools that I've seen parents engage with. And when I think about the ability to impact education, it's going back to this agent-driven world of something that can customize or interact with your child in a rich way, can tutor them, can teach them. I'm a little bit curious about your thoughts of either those areas of global impact of AI in a positive sense or other areas that you're most excited about.
Yeah, I think education and health and perhaps financial inclusion, those would be the three things, obviously, at Stripe. The first one on the education side, yeah, I was in the UAE just last week, and it was fantastic to see. They have an AI minister in the UAE. In their health department, they launched for the country an AI tutor built on one of the GPT family APIs, but also, I met the founder who's building that because using a variety of different techniques to sort of ground that model. The beauty of having a personalized tutor for all the students of the world is absolutely imminently doable. When you think about the government transfers, government subsidies that exist in education all over the world, even in the developing world, and now to be able to have, and GPT-4 turbo pricing, I think it's easy for us to think about delivering personalized tutors that are very, very capable. So I'm very excited about that. Healthcare is another one. Like if you take even the US, 19% of our sort of GDP is in healthcare. And we know we need the health outcomes to get better, costs to come down. And a lot of the cost is, quite frankly, workflow cost, right? It's not even like we always go to, some magical drug, this, that, and the other. Those are all fantastic. It's important. But the real cost is in care management. And that's why I'm excited about even partnering with, someone like Epic, right, who can make a massive difference. Epic is everywhere. They're ubiquitous. They're building generative AI deeply. And I mean, these things about, like, they were telling me about all these use cases, right? When you finish a shift and you want to hand off, that process, wow, why not have a summary? Why not have, when I'm in the bedside, have a bot that I can interrogate to ask all the questions and not have anything lost? The inbox for the physician. With Nuance, we have this fantastic sort of way now to be able to really transcribe the doctor-patient conversation and reduce physician burden. So I think we can, and that technology once built, the software once built, can reach every hospital in the world. And so those would be the two places, I think, that we can make a huge difference.
We talked a lot about AI. Microsoft obviously does an enormous amount of things in an enormous amount of important areas relative to B2B, consumer, et cetera. What other areas are you excited about besides AI?
Look, we just finished closing Activision Blizzard. We were very, very excited about gaming. You brought up Minecraft. And yeah, so gaming is another place where I think as a category for us, I mean, in fact, if I look back at Microsoft, there are three things that I think come naturally to us, which is in our, I would say, DNA. One is these platforms and tools. We will always be a platform developer tools company. That's sort of at the core heritage. The second thing is productivity and communication software. I think that's the other one that we do. And the third is gaming. In fact, I think Flight Simulator was built before Windows was built. And so we will always be in all these three categories. And also in gaming, what is exciting to me is, we love the console, we love PC gaming, but with some of the changes in cloud gaming, we can get gaming everywhere. And so that, I think, is going to be the place where, and AI as a platform for all of these would make a real difference as well.
So I think you've had one of the most successful CEO runs of all time. In the history of capitalism. I don't say that lightly. And you took a company that was worth $250, $300 billion market cap. And at the time, people thought that was an insanely high market cap. And now you're at $2.5 trillion. So you've added $2.25 trillion in market cap over the last 8 or 9 years. What do you want your legacy at Microsoft to be? And how do you think about that going forward? Or how do you think about, it's N years from now and you're looking back. What do you want to have accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, look, so the way I think about legacy, perhaps, or what have you, I'm very suspect of anybody who comes in and says, oh, I showed up in the job, the person who was there before me was all terrible, and I changed it all, and it's all me. I'm very suspicious of those people. Because at some level, the job is to build institutional strength so that the people who take over from you are more successful than you. In fact, I always think about, if the next person and by the way, I always thought about this growing up in the company, that if the person who takes over from me in any role is able to succeed, then maybe you did something right. So quite honestly, it's, like in tech, there's no franchise value. We know that. You have to sort of reinvent yourself. So that means some of the things you do, you have to also really, like somebody said, the metaphor of you got to make sure you leave enough, energy in the system so that it can continue to renew it, right? Just thinking of even success by market cap sometimes is definitely not the way to measure things, because you got to invest. Like long before it's conventional wisdom, you can't expect markets to always reward you. In the long run, they will, but there will be periods of time that, as Bezos would say, you got to be okay being misunderstood, which I think is right. So therefore, I look at all of those as perhaps long-run indicators of something that went right, but not the only indicators. And so therefore, I'm much more focused on making sure, one, that Microsoft's doing relevant things in the future. And if we have created enough institutional strength, cultural strength, we're not doing things out of envy. We're doing things that are useful in the world. We're doing things that sort of help the company succeed, but also it's creating. Like I feel if the world around us is doing well and we're doing well, that's a fantastic sort of equilibrium to achieve.
Makes a lot of sense. And then I guess the very last question, since we're almost out of time, and thank you again for being so generous with your time. When you look at other areas of technology that you consider very important, there's a lot of different things people are talking about now in terms of fusion or other forms of energy, self-driving cars and how that's going to transform cities and transportation. There's a variety of these areas. Are there any that you're watching most keenly or that you're most excited about the societal impact that they may bring?
I think energy. I mean, if I look at, even for us, it's pretty existential, right? If I look at our own energy needs as we think about AI and our build out, we definitely need, I mean, at some level, the lucky break we have is it's all fresh project starts. We're the largest purchasers of green energy today in the world. So that means we can stimulate even a lot of these new projects, which could be sometimes risky. But I feel the biggest thing that we have to make is the energy transition. And the energy transition is a complex thing. I mean, I'd never realized this, that effectively, I think what we're talking about is you've got to take 250 years of chemistry and the entire petrochemical sort of value chain and sort of somehow compress it into 25 years. And I look at that and say, wow, that's the real challenge. I mean, so even from an AI perspective, I'm excited about like this AI stuff being sort of super useful in somehow synthesizing some new molecule that then helps with some new batteries, which then help with taking the abundant solar power and making it much more possible for us to tap into it, even in a data center, right? So those are the kinds of real problems that need to be solved, and quickly. So that's the one industry more so than anything, and that entire chain that I think we have both an adjacency to it and a real dependency on it.
Great. Well, fantastic. Thank you again for joining today.
Thank you so much, Elad. It's our pleasure. Thank you.